We are going to start by taking the place of an API client, and we are just going to use an API to learn a number of things about them. So if you take a look at this slide where I show documentation for an example API, you can see that there are 4 boxes, and these represent the API resources. So in this API, we can track customer orders. So we have customers, orders, items, and products. You can see that I have created relationships between these resources, and I'm saying here that customers have many orders, orders have many items, and items have one product. So this is how these resources are related. In each box, you can see a URL. So this is the URL that we are going to use to access those resources. So for example, for customers, we can see that the URL is HTTP. In place of the 3 dots, you will have your host name and possibly a port number, and then it's /customers/. This is the collection URL that represents all the resources of type customer. If I wanted to get all the customers in this API, I will go to my console and send a request to this URL, and it will be a GET request. GET requests are used to obtain information. These are read-only requests that do not modify the state of the server. So let's give that a try. So I'm going to say HTTP GET. While I do this, I should explain that HTTP, the command that you see here on the left of my command line, is a HTTP client that you can use to easily send requests to an API. So that is what I'm going to use through the class, and you have it already installed in your virtual environment, so you will be able to use it too. So my host, it's localhost at 5000, and this is my URL. So I'm going to send a GET request, and this is my response. So let's take a look at this. We obtained a 200 response, so the call was successful. We received JSON data. This is JavaScript object notation. We are going to use this format for the API. This is typically what people use these days, but it's not the only format that you can use to represent resources. So XML is another good option. You can see a date and a server, which are not interesting to us, and then the most important part, which is the response. So this is the JSON data, and it's telling me that customers is an empty array. I have no customers. So this is a new run of the server, so my database is empty. So this is the expected response. Now, if you can see here, in yellow, I indicated GET and POST next to the customer's URL. That means that this URL will take GET and POST requests, but no others. As I said before, GET is to obtain information. POST is used to create new items. So when you send a POST request to a collection URL, like the collection of customers that we have here, we will be creating a new customer. Now, we will need to send some information for this to be successful. And here below, you can see that customers have 3 fields. And you can see the first one is name, which is a string of 64 characters long. And then you can see 2 more that have a star next to them. And we are going to ignore those for a moment. Let's say that the only data that for this simple application we need is to provide a name. Let's go ahead and try to send a POST request to customers. And I'm going to send name equals, say, John. Response was 201. This is the response that you get when you create something and the operation was successful. That means that a new resource was created. You can see here among the different headers that we get in the response, we obtain a location header. And this is the URL where the new resource, this new customer that we created, is living. So we can refer to that new customer using this URL. you can see that the body of the response is empty because there's really nothing to say. We asked for a resource to be created and the call was successful. We know where the new resource is, so we are really done. We don't need anything in the response. So let's see what happens now if we send a request to the new resource. So let's do get and copy this. So now you can see we obtain a response. It's again a 200, so it was successful. And now we obtain some data. We obtain the name, and this is the name that we set, so it's still there, and it's the name that we set. And we have the other two items that you saw here in my slide that were shown with a star next to them. So these are links. So with these, I can refer to other resources that are related to this one. So for example, all the resources in this API will have a self URL, and that will give me the URL of the resource that I'm getting. This is the same URL I send the request to. You can see the other one is orders URL. This will be a URL that I'm going to use if I need to create an order for this resource. So as you can see, all the links that relate resources are given in my responses. So when I get a resource back, I can use parts of that response to discover new things about this API. Going back to the slide, you can see here that I don't say how this orders URL is constructed. All I'm saying is that it's going to be returned, and that is the meaning of the star. That means that this is a read-only attribute that will be returned when you get this resource. I'm also saying for each one which types of methods I can send to it. The important part is that I'm not telling you how to construct URLs. I'm returning URLs with the URLs that you already know. So you discover new URLs as you use the API. In this API, the only URLs that are publicly documented are three. It's the one for customers, the one for orders, and the one for products. You can see that for items, I decided not to even allow a public API. So you, at this point, know nothing about how to get items. And that's the beauty of designing APIs the right way, because you start learning about things as you navigate the web of resources. So let's try to create an order now. When we received this response, we found that we have a URL to create orders. So I can copy this, and I can say, I can send it, let's, just to see what happens, let's send a GET request to the orders. And by the way, I didn't mention this before, but I end the resource URLs that return collections. I like to end them with a slash. That's sort of an analogy with a folder or a directory where there's a collection of items inside. So when I design the APIs, and this is not required, but when I design them, collections end with slash, and items, individual items, do not end with slash, just as a little way to differentiate between groups and singular items. So let's see what happens. Here I send a request to get orders for my John customer, which was a new customer, so obviously it has no orders yet. So now I'm going to go ahead and create an order. So we are going to change this to post, and we are going to look at our documentation, and here we see that the only item that we need to create an order is to have a date. So we are going to set a date, and the date is going to be in ISO standard format. So I'm going to set it as, let's say, January 1st, time midnight. It doesn't really matter, this is a test. So that is my date. So there we go. And now we get a 201 back, so that means that the order was created. And here we get a location resource, and now we have a new link, and now we know how to get this order. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to send the GET request. And here is the information of my order. If we go back to our documentation, we see that there are 3 items here that are read-only, I have the self URL that I always include in my resources. I have a URL that links back to the customer. Of course, we know this. And then we have one new one, a URL that links to the list of items in this order. So as you can see, we are navigating this. Now I can do a get to the items, and that's going to come back empty. So now we need to create some items. But items, as you can see here in the documentation, are related to products, and we still don't have any products. So let's go ahead and create a product or two. We have here the URL, so the URL is public and it's /products/, and we see that we can send get and post requests. So let's go ahead and say, if I send a get request, I'm going to get an empty list. So I'm not going to bother with that. I'm going to send that, and the name is going to be, say, Candy. So my product was created, and now I have a URL. If I get this, I have a name, I have a self URL. So this one does not have any additional links to other resources. But now we have a product, so we can create an item. So we can go back and find here the URL to create an item for the order that we had before. And it's this one. So now we say post item, and we have quantity. We can set it to, say, 3, and product URL. We set it to, I'm sorry, not that one. We set it to the product URL, which we have right here. And this, again, came back with the 201, and we have a new item in this order. So if we now send a get request to the item collection of this order, you're going to see that items now comes back with one element. So here we have the one item that we just added. So notice that for items, I did not put a public URL. So why is that? If you think about it, items really have a strong dependency to the order they belong to. So it would really make no sense to get items outside of the order they are in. So in that case, it makes no sense to have independent items, and I do not want to have a public URL. This is not the same for orders. Orders, we can get them through the customer by using the orders URL that we get here, and that will give us a collection that only has the orders for this customer. But we have another option here. We have a public URL for orders, and when we call it this way, we are going to get a collection of all the orders of all the customers. And that could be useful, so in that case, I decided that it was interesting to have that URL available. So what else we have? If you can see some of the links here, you have put and delete methods in some of them. So let's see what those are. The put is typically used to modify an existing resource. So let's see if we can modify our customer. So we are going to find our customer URL, which was somewhere in here. This is our customer URL. So we are going to send a put request. This customer was called John, and now we are going to call him John Smith. And we get a 200 response. That means that the request was successful. We get no response, and we get nothing else. All we need to know is that the request worked. So now if I send a get request to this URL, I'm going to get the updated name, John Smith. If you look here, we also have a delete method in some of the URLs. So let's give that a try. We're going to try to delete an item. So if we go back to our item list, here we have the items in our order. We're going to try to delete this one. So I'm going to send a delete request to this. And there we go. We get a 200 response, and that means that the item was deleted, and there's really nothing else to do. If I now get my collection of items for this order, it's now again empty. So I hope this was a useful demonstration. I tried to show the main principles that rule API design. This is the best design in my opinion, and it allows for modern maintainable APIs to be created. So now it's time to build this API. So you're going to learn how to create this, and you're going to be surprised because it's really easy.